What's up, guys? Welcome back to the infamous project. It is Saturday, just after midday, and I have about 2 hours to get some work done before we're doing some Christmas-related activities. So out here in the garage, and you can see I have a black hatch sitting here behind me, and that black hatch belongs to LJ, aka Little John, aka my foxbody neighbor that lives like a mile down the road. And in case you guys are wondering, it honestly was one of those. I was driving down the road, saw his car underneath the carport, pulled up, knocked on the door, and as some of us foxbody guys do, just be like, hey, interested in selling that car? And he was like, nope, because I just got it. I've had some in the past and I just picked it up. And the relationship grew from there. So John got a nice little 306 built here with some Holley HCI goods, and he wants more power. So he was really happy with this, got it dialed in for the most part, and this is a driver for him, and he does want to send it off to body and paint at some point, but to him, the performance in the seat is more important than the performance of the looks. And in reality, this car is a beautiful 10-footer. You know, black always shines up real nice. You got chrome wheels that are shining. So when the thing is clean, it looks really, really nice. And it's 93, so it's actually got gray leather inside. Opal gray, which is my favorite of all grays because it does not seem to fade and go 50 shades like light titanium does and like smoke gray does. So John picked up this Powerdyne unit sitting right here, and it was a local marketplace find, and there's a couple little things that I'm going to point out about it when we go along. So other than that, that's the name of the game. Is, you know, I bought a bunch of hardware because hardware was missing as some used stuff goes, but I'm just going to be bolting this thing on and seeing how far along I can get here today. So with that said, I'll be pulling the top radiator line off. I'll probably pull the fan shroud and the fan out just to give me some more working room. We're going to be taking off his old Anderson pipe here, and we'll be exchanging that with a new one, which is here, so that we can replumb the air into the back of the blower. Now this is an AC car, so we got a couple AC lines here that we'll be working around. And really the name of the game is to pull the alternator, and this car has a smog pump delete idler pulley, Castle Custom's favorite modification when you delete the smog pump. So alternator off, tensioner off, smog pump, idler, delete, pulley and bracket off, and then ultimately the main bracket that holds the alternator onto the cylinder head will be off. And then we will be relocating the tensioner into this area. And notice how there's already a factory style tensioner here. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. This is some interesting engineering that was done here, and fingers crossed it's all going to work. So we've got that, and that's pretty much it, guys. Should be pretty straightforward to knock this thing, to knock this process out. The only thing is getting that idler pulley and the alternator to bolt up the way that we want. You know, we got one of these, and just depending on how things go, we might need a collar or some spacers in there just to make sure all the accessories bolt in properly. But anyways, let's get ripping this apart and seeing how far we can get in 2 hours time. Alright guys, so about 15 minutes later, if even that, we've got the passenger side accessory brackets all dismounted. We've got the fan shroud and clutch fan disconnected. Obviously the battery is disconnected, alternator, and the intake tube. We can see here we've actually got a little bit of oil, so might need to get an oil separator involved here, especially since the motor is going to be boosted. Not a huge ordeal, but now that we've got all this room created and ready, guys, it's pretty straightforward. Like, I'm going to remove the front bracket that's bolted to the blower here off the main bracket that's going to go to the head. And once we get this bolted to the head, actually, I might try and do some mock-up first, just make sure, like I said, that the smog pump pulley and the alternator setup is going to work. And as long as we get that sorted out, then there really isn't that much more to worry about. In fact, I'd love to do this in a way where you don't even need the pollution pump pulley, but I know you got to run something in order to make all this stuff work. So the one nice thing about the Powerdyne, it might be old school, but it's self-contained. And what that means is that we don't need to punch a bung or a drain hole into the oil pan, put a bung on there, or tap it, or do any of those things. We can just simply bolt this blower on and not worry. Now, one thing that we do need to do, we need to remove the lower crank pulley because we need another set of ribs. So we're gonna unbolt that crank pulley, and then this guy is gonna go on the inside of the factory crank pulley and then give us 2 ribs. So I guess once I get that off and get this stuff all mocked up and I show you what's going on, you're gonna get a better understanding of just what's gonna happen. So let's get that lower crank pulley off. We'll get this guy on and we'll start tackling the bracket. All right, guys, the crank pulley is bolted into the factory crank pulley. So you can see we now have 2 ribs. The outer rib is gonna run the blower belt, and then the inner will run the accessory drive like I did before. Now, it's time to get on our main blower bracket. And if you look at this guy here, you are going to see some welding. And what happened was when John bought the kit, it came like you see it over there. This bracket was missing. So he went online and managed to find one. However, this top portion was bent like this, and it resulted in not being able to bolt the top part of that bracket into here, and this was not square by any means. So, of course, because this is a cast, he tried to put it in the press and bend it. He did bend it successfully, but there was 2 little stress cracks as a result, which, again, not too surprising. And so he welded it up. So everything is good. You know, it might not be the prettiest thing in the world, but it's going to be functional. So this guy is now going to go in place of where that bracket was. So we just need to get things lined up here. So they will be, I don't know, something like that. I'm just going to move some things out of the way here. You can see that coolant line is going to have to get a little tweaked, but we'll get that sorted out once I put the camera down and figure out what is getting bolted in where, because some bolts go all the way through this plate and like through this guy and ultimately into the head. This is going to be a standalone bolt into the head, as is that guy on that side. So we're going to be bolting in these 2 guys into the head, and that'll get us started. And then we got to make sure that we can run that other bracket, the bolt, all the way through here and into the head, and make sure that that's all going to be secure. It's actually a lot of weight for just, you know, something that's only bolting to your head, because, you know, you're bolting on a blower head unit, which is not light. You've got tensioners, usually smog pump that would all be hanging off that. So needless to say, you want to make sure that you have good hardware and that you're following directions and that you're not, you know, forgetting to put some of the bolts in. So long story short, you need to make sure that those 3 bolts, you've got those right, because that cylinder head is ultimately, like, it's the foundation of the whole support system for your accessory and blower drive on this side. All right guys, what I noticed is kind of sweet is that the bracket or idler delete plate pulley that John has actually has a provision right here like the factory smog pump would have, which would allow you to put this here, and then you can run the little hang down bracket for the alternator, which is pretty nifty. I can dig it. So I'm gonna try and wrestle this thing in here, and I'll try and give you guys a better view once maybe I get it in, and we can talk about some of the challenges that I've found, right? Nothing ever goes smooth. I've got the main brackets on. Now I do need to get 2 bolts that are the proper length. I think I have the right one for the one side of the alternator. The one that ultimately I believe I'm gonna have to shorten is the one below this tensioner. And that's the long one going right into the cylinder head. I don't know, I don't think I can thread in that far into the cylinder head, at least not safely. I probably could put a couple washers on it, but I might just end up cutting the bolt down if there's enough threads, and I will do it that way. This bolt here, going through the main, I guess, collar of the alternator, is I need one for there that goes pretty much straight through. You can see we've got our smog pump idler pulley on. I've got the bracket underneath going to the other side of the alternator. If we look right there at that shiny bolt, and then we got the L bracket coming down here, and ultimately going into this guy on the alternator right here. So this is all working. This is all great, which is, I don't know, I feel like this is always a headache, but we managed to get it. Got it with ease. Now I did need to put a collar or, you know, a glorified spacer on the top portion of that pollution pulley just to be able to make sure that it would sandwich between both brackets properly and be nice and tight. So you can see we've got the factory tensioner on. I just need to get one more bolt through here. There's this guy, there's a nut that goes on because this bracket ultimately goes onto one of the water pump studs. So you get a nut on there, and then that gives this plenty of support, which is good, and that will run our accessory drive belt. And then we have this other tensioner here, which will get a nut on the back, and I'm gonna have to see at which position. You can see they got 2 holes drilled out here for kind of that dowel style pin to set the tensioner where we want it for belt tension, and that'll be for the blower drive. Where's the challenge on this? Because it seems like everything is going really easy. Well, right when I thought everything was going nice, and when I put that blower on, I noticed something. Now, it's not the fuel line, because the fuel line will actually fit over there. It's not the AC line, because, well, we can make the AC line do what we need to do. And it's not the other fuel line. It is that valve cover. This valve cover is right into that boot. Now, I don't know. We're gonna have this guy here. I don't know if there's going to be enough room to get the coupler on with that valve cover. So, what does that mean? That means, John, you might need to go back to more of a stockish style valve cover, because these guys, you can see they're built all the way out, and they're great, right? Like, they give you tons of room for all of your rockers and everything else that's underneath, but in this case, I don't think it's going to work, which is a little bit of pain in the ass. So John, you probably spent pretty good money on these valve covers, and well, sorry to tell you, I think they're going to have to come off. So that ultimately creates a stopping point for me here today because, well, number one, I got to source out some valve covers. I got to talk to John first, tell him what's going on. He's going to be happy that we got a lot of progress made here, but just is frustrating. So I'll talk to him. We'll get some factory valve covers. I'm assuming he's probably not going to want anything too, overly fancy or pretty. I think I've got a set of, actually they're right over here. And it might be a good trade-off. I've got a set of these Power by Fords, right? And, if we have to do a little bit of clearancing in there for his rockers, then so be it. But these could be an option. So that, otherwise, honestly, I've got a factory set in here, but this is a nice clean factory motor, so I really don't want to mess with it. So it's stuff like valve covers that things were a dime a dozen, people just threw them away. And now here I am. And I've got a lot of like oddball parts, but there are certain things that just sometimes you don't have inventory of, like a set of factory valve covers. So I'll get with John, I'll see what he wants to do, and then we're going to resume the video, ultimately swap out the valve covers, which means the upper intake manifold will have to come off, which I'm not looking forward to because these Holley intakes have ridiculous access. At least this one is in the center, not like a Celine intake, but guys, getting down underneath in there and here, it's not always a fun time, but we'll get it done, don't worry. Well, the upper intake is off and it wasn't near as bad, and that's because they use this bolt here on like a Celine intake that they don't have that there, and you gotta fish your wrench on the underside, which sucks. So I'm about to take off these valve covers, which here you can actually get a really good idea of how large they are. I want to say they're 21 inches wide in this format versus a factory one, which is I think like 17, and it tapers. So I got this set from my commercial shop that were sitting on another motor that I had. So we will pop these guys off, see what kind of rockers he's running, see what type of clearancing that we need to do in here. And usually it, ends up being in the corners here. Just got to take a little bit of the bosses out, and sometimes in here, but it really depends on how things are adjusted and which brand and everything else. So let's pop off this valve cover and have a look. Here. Yeah. Baffle's definitely going to have to come out. So let's try the other side. Doesn't have a baffle. Let's see here. All kinds of room. Wow. I'm amazed at how much room there is in here, guys. Like, look at this. I don't know what style rockers these are or who makes them. I'm gonna have to ask John and see. But yeah, as soon as we take that baffle out, we're going to be in good shape, which means all I need to do is scuff down these valve covers and maybe paint them up for him if he even cares. They're actually in pretty nice shape the way they are. And sometimes you can actually still get the baffle back in, or you can make a little bit of your own baffle. So we'll see what we need to do. All right, so about an hour later and managed to get everything buttoned up in here. The only challenge, or I guess modification that needed to be made, was I needed to trim out the lower portion of the fan shroud to make room for the crank pulley, because now the crank pulley is much wider. But you can see everything is now run factory clutch fan, everything fits in there. Got our distributor back on and wires put back on, and everything looks good with the exception of the fact I don't have the belt for the blower. So we are going to do a test fire. And guys, I would actually recommend that you get the water pump pulley on without your clutch fan, or if you're running electric fans, you don't even need to worry about it, but maybe do that before putting all of this in. Now, I did all my measurements to make sure that everything looked like it was true and lined up. So I'm pretty confident, and I just went for it and said I'm putting it back together because, well, I like to test myself sometimes. So that's what I'm going to do here. Two things to keep in mind. Number one, we need a breather cap for here because we don't want to be running this line anymore, because now we're making boost and we don't want to pressurize our crankcase, which is ultimately what would happen if you kept this line connected here. So I just have this plastic cap on here for now until I get a new set of rubber nipples, and we're going to get a breather for the valve cover, and then this setup here is going to get, I guess, rejigged with an oil separator unit, so we will be able to get that all into place once we make sure that our proof of concept and everything else works. So I'm going to go ahead now, connect our negative battery terminal, and nothing's caught on fire, so I think should be in good shape there. I've got the alternator connections all hooked up. We got the mass airflow meter and cold air intake onto the Anderson pipe here. All of our couplers and brackets are tight, so everything should be good. And ultimately right now the car is going to be running, sucking air through the blower without the blower turning, which is fine. There's not going to be an issue there, but let's see if the car will fire back up. Guys, right there. I think grinding off some of the head of that bolt, hopefully I can get a wrench in there and get that done. All right guys, I ground down the head of the bolt a little bit, got rid of the, I don't know, the marks and the inscriptions on the top, and I also swapped out for a slightly thinner washer. So that should take away our little bit of tick, 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 tick. And, you know, like I said, I was kind of concerned. I'm like, man, I know I clearanced enough underneath that valve cover, so why is it making all this noise? So again, you know, kind of a good thing I put everything back together, because I would have done the test otherwise and thought nothing was wrong and slapped this together and would have been like, oh shit, what the hell's going on? So anyways, going to jam that tensioner back on and hopefully everything will be good to go. Okay. Yeah, looks like we've got probably a good 1/4 inch of play in there now. So hopefully no more crazy noises. Beautiful. Well, I definitely got an exhaust leak over here, but our accessory belt's spinning, doing what it's supposed to be. We don't have an alternator light. The fan is not hitting the bolt. So now all we need to do is make some boost. So I was doing a little bit of back and forth with John yesterday. I made him do some O'Reilly's parts runs, and we finally found the belt that would fit. We went through a couple iterations, but we found the one, and it ended up being a 52.5 inch right here. The 52 just wasn't enough. So I'm gonna try and actually get a Gates belt, just because those Master Pros guys, they're trash. So going to get that updated. I've run all of the, little vacuum line to get to the A-pillar gauges here. I've run the wiring for the wideband gauge. We just need to get the wideband ultimately bunged into the H-pipe so that we can get a proper reading. So the car should be going to the exhaust shop tomorrow. We'll get that sorted out. But let's crank this thing up and see here. Look at that. Even got a green LED in there. So we're definitely going to need some tuning on the car, but everything seems to be doing all right. We're making boost. I don't think the belt is slipping, which means that crazy creative tensioner pulley setup works. Drivability seems to be good, which supercharged car, the drivability should be good. It should be pretty much like driving stock. So I think we're in pretty good shape here. We'll get the AFR gauge hooked up, get the laptop hooked up, check out, do some data logging, see how everything's looking. And from there, John should be doing pretty good. I think he's going to be really happy with just adding that extra little bit of power to his HCI setup. We just have to get oil separator hooked up, breathe out our crankcase while it's breathing a bit here with that open. So pretty straightforward, right guys? Just follow the instructions, follow the basics in this case while you're putting together a bunch of miscellaneous used parts, but it all worked out in the end. So John should be really happy with that. Like I said, once we get the O2 bung welded in there to get the AFR gauge hooked up, then we can do our data logging, we can do our monitoring, adjust the timing a little bit more, and should be good to tear up the streets. I know he wanted to just get that little bit more power out of the car, and I think he's going to be happy with it. Until next time, we'll see you back here on the Infamous Project.